The Nature of Belief by Frost in the Warren. Chapter 8. Because It's Just a Dream. Distant Pass. 17-year-old Emma Overland shivered, drawing her cloak further around her shoulders. It was cold. She'd loved the cold as a child and still did in some ways. She mumbled out curses under her breath that her parents would most definitely not approve of as she stepped over a root. She shouldn't have stayed out so late with her friend. She should have left at sunset when the path to her home was clearer. At least the moon was bright tonight, and the tree branches weren't enough to block it out. Thank goodness for small blessings. She stumbled on a stray rock and had to catch herself on a tree trunk. Her hand melted the frost on the bark, and she pulled it away. Emma glanced at the fern-like pattern and smiled. It was beautiful. It would have loved it. Emma closed her eyes and breathed, then blinked and continued on. "Miss Overland?" Emma gasped and spun, drawing her arm back in preparation to defend herself. "Whoa, whoa!" The figure coming up the path held its hands up. "It's all right, it's just me." He stepped into the moonlight. "Mr. Bennet?" Emma lowered her arm. "What are you doing here?" 21-year-old Jameson Bennet scratched the back of his hand sheepishly. "I heard at the tavern from your friend that you'd set out on your own. I thought I'd come and provide you an escort." At the end of his sentence, he was shuffling his feet and mumbling shyly. Emma's look was exceedingly unimpressed, but as the silence stretched, she rolled her eyes and smiled fondly. "Thank you, Mr. Bennet. Though I was fine on my own, I suppose an escort would not go amiss." Jameson's smile was sweet in the darkness. "I appreciate it, Miss Overland." She considered asking why, but decided not to. Jameson came up next to her, and they continued to walk. A few quiet moments later, they came upon an area where the branches overhead cleared entirely, creating at least 10 feet of path where the moon shone unfettered to sparkle on the snow. She paused, admiring the sight. "It's beautiful," she murmured. Jameson glanced at her in the snow. "I'd heard you enjoyed winter more than most," he commented. "It's my favorite season." It had been his, too. "You must love snowball fights," he joked. When she smiled, he continued, "And snowmen, and snow angels, and ice skating." "No." He blinked at her abrupt interruption. "No? I don't like ice skating." A hush settled around them, and Jameson cast his eyes about desperately for something to say. His gaze settled on a fern-like pattern on the nearby trees. The moonlight seemed brighter as he said, "I wonder who makes them." Emma looked up at him, expression withdrawn. "The patterns in the frost, I wonder who makes them." "You mean someone like the Easter Bunny?" Emma's voice lightened, a small smile putting her lips. "Or the Tooth Fairy?" Jameson nodded, relaxing at her grin. "Exactly." Emma hummed, and her gaze was drawn to the moon. "Maybe there is." The words tumbled out before she knew what she was saying. "Oh?" Jameson crossed his arms. "Who?" Emma floundered, but the words came unbidden to her lips and tripped out. "A boy, my age, with a smile like freshly fallen snow." "Really? Are you sure you're not just describing a male version of yourself?" Jameson teased. Emma huffed, the odd discomfort of speaking words she wasn't sure were hers, replaced by annoyance at his manner. She continued, and as she did, the words began to feel less like they'd been forced from her mouth. "No, he has white hair and blue eyes, like the sky on a sunny day, and he likes to draw ferns in the frost and brings snow to play in." Her words became faster as she became more animated. Memories began surfacing of a brown-haired boy, and she focused on them. "He laughs all the time, bouncing around like he thinks he can fly, and—" "Hey, Emma, let me show you something!" She ran into the bright lilac section of the path, scooping up a headful of snow. She sloppily formed it into a ball and threw it at Jameson. "He can make perfect snowballs!" "Hey!" Jameson dodged and made a snowball himself and returned fire. They began throwing snow and running in that bright section of path, laughing as they did so. Jameson cried out, "What else? What else?" as he dodged her throws. "Do I have to wear them?" he whined. "He hated shoes." "I bet I can climb to the top." "He can be reckless." Slim fingers pinched her nose, a warm laugh ringing as she squeaked, "He likes to nip at your nose." "There aren't a lot of people in the area my age," he shrugged. "He's a bit lonely, but—" "Goodness, Emma, don't you ever smile?" "Ah, see, there it is." "He's joyful and he—" Her words hitched in her throat. "You're not going to fall in. We're going to have a little fun instead." Her mouth opened and closed, but the words had trouble passing the sudden lump in her throat. "Would I trick you? He plays tricks," she finally said. "He always plays tricks." They had stopped throwing snowballs and stood ensconced in moonlight. She panted for breath. Jameson brushed a hand through brown hair that was slightly darker with melting snow. His cheeks were as flushed as hers, but his eyes shone. He looked at her with a gaze that made her blush.
"Sounds like something out of a dream,"
he whispered wondrously.
"What's his name, then?"
"Jack," she said immediately, then unthinkingly added, "Frost. His name is Jack Frost."
"Jack Frost," Jameson repeated. "You'll have to tell this tale to the children in the village. I think they'll like it."
"Yes," she agreed. They continued on. She bid goodbye upon reaching her home, but paused by the door when he called after her.
"Miss Overland?"
"Yes." She turned. He was fidgeting again, but he quickly stopped and looked up at her confidently.
"If it isn't a problem, may I call on you tomorrow?"
She blushed again and nodded. "All right. Tomorrow." She approached the door.
"Miss Overland?"
"Yes." She turned quickly this time, heart thudding in her chest.
"I'd like it very much if I could call you Emma."
She smiled, and in her mind she could almost hear her brothers teasing. "Yes," she replied. "I'd like that very much." The myth of Jack Frost spread from there in much the same way a scarf is knitted. Emma Overland provided the cast-on. Then with each retelling a stitch was made until it gained length. The myth would be retold in many iterations, providing twists, yarn-overs, and bumpy pearls that strayed from the original design, until finally what was left was a long misshapen mess of everything, with some well-crafted sections and others so full of holes and gaps it was barely held together. But it was soft and made with the loving hands of many, and most importantly, it could be worn. In the end, that would be enough. The Bennet family soon adopted a new tradition, starting by the addition of Emma Bennet nee Overland. With each generation, a child would in some way carry a form of the name Jackson. This continued for generations, all the way down to the 21st century, where the newest example of the tradition lived on in a little girl by the name of Sophie Jacqueline Bennet. Present. The eggs were ruined. Eggshells dug into the bottoms of his feet as he walked down the tunnel. It exited on the surface, and he followed it and searched until he found the guardians. His face crumpled when the first thing he saw was a child walk through Bunny. "Where was the spirit?" Tithiana asked North. Her wings were fluttering noticeably slower now, and exhaustion lined the edges of her face and put bruises under her eyes. "I thought it was helping us." Jack stuttered. "I don't know," North said. "Perhaps it—" "That was never any help." Bunny's voice rang out, pained and hollow. She clenched her hands in her midsection, wringing her fingers. "Bunny!" "No, Tooth." Bunnyman drew up and turned to them, to Jack with anger and sorrow. He looked near broken. "If there was any help, it wouldn't have left us in our time of need. It wouldn't have abandoned us to the nightmares." "I didn't!" Jack reached up for Bunny. "I swear I didn't!" "There's no spirit to help us," he continued, "because there never was one to begin with. It never existed." He shook his head harshly. "I have to believe that. I have to believe that everything that we could have done was done." Jack jolted, eyes wide and mouth open. I... Bunny seemed to crumble, voice heavy with weariness. "Easter is new life. It's hope. And that was gone. If I let myself believe that it could have been saved." Jack could think of only one other time he'd ever felt this low, but he couldn't do now what he'd done then. He'd promised Baby Tooth. Jack exhaled in one great gust and bowed his head, eyes closed. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen." His voice cracked. The storm in Jack's chest had been kept going by his anger and worry, but at its center was a tight ball of 300-year-old hope. "I'll save her. They'll see me. I'll save her. They'll see me. I'll save her. They'll see me, see me, see me." In an instant it flickered, dwindled, and finally died. If Jack had looked up, he'd have seen Bunny's harsh flinch, but he didn't. He kept his head down, pulled up his hood, and let the wind carry him away. He didn't stop until he hit Antarctica. The chill tried to nip at him, but there was no cold Jack Frost could not handle. He settled himself on the overhang of a great frozen canyon. Snow whipped around him. The wind screamed. He reached into his pockets and drew out the angel. With closed eyes, his fingers traced features he'd long ago memorized. Tremors racked his shoulders, and it didn't take long to realize he was crying. "Damn it!" he muttered bitterly. He wiped the tears away. He'd been doing so well. He'd been able to completely avoid crying since Easter of '68. A tear left a frosty path down his cheek, and he juggled humorlessly. There went 44 years down the drain. If I let myself believe. Jack couldn't blame Bunny. If he'd been in his shoes, he'd have been just as angry, just as upset. But understanding why didn't make it better. Disbelief due to ignorance was one thing. Disbelief by choice, that was something else entirely, and it hurt all the more because of it. As his tears came quicker and the tremors turned to full-bodied sobs, Jack sat and curled his face into his knees. He clutched the angel close to his chest. I knew this would happen. Jack froze. He slowly tucked the angel away. He stood, picking up his staff in a deceptively loose grip. I thought I might find you here when I heard. Jack turned reluctantly, knowing what he would see, and attempted to prolong his feigned ignorance. Pitch Black stared at him with eyes that made him shiver with apprehension, and a small smile that seemed strangely familiar in a frightening way. Hello, Jack Frost. This was said in a tone that Jack, if he didn't know any better, would almost say was fond. It has been far too long.